This now brings us to our opening keynote speaker, the Honourable Judge David Arnot, to present the nexus of human rights, education and research, facilitating collaboration at the edge of the horizon. A University of Saskatchewan alumnus, the Honourable Judge David Arnot received his Bachelor of Law degree in 1975. In 1978, he became a senior Crown prosecutor and later appointed as a judge of the Provincial Court of Saskatchewan in 1981. On 1st of January 1997, he was seconded by the federal government to be the Treaty Commissioner for the province of Saskatchewan for a 10-year period. Judge Arnot's work on the Teaching Treaties in the Classroom project was cited as a model for Canada by the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Racism. He introduced the phrase, "We are all treaty people," to capture the nature of the treaty relationship in Canada. Judge Arnot was seconded from the Provincial Court of Saskatchewan in January 2009 to be the Chief Commissioner of the Saskatchewan Human Rights Commission. Thank you for joining us this morning and welcome, Judge Arnot.
Well, good morning, and thank you for joining us today. Thank you to the University of Saskatchewan for making the 4th annual People Around the World Conference possible. In particular, I want to acknowledge Meghna Ramaswamy for her vision in seeing the link between human rights and good research, and Megan Philantra, whose assistance was important to me to provide me an opportunity to speak here today. I want to take this opportunity to thank President Peter Stoichev for his support in the work that the Saskatchewan Human Rights Commission is doing in this province and for our continued dialogue on a number of common issues. I'd also like to acknowledge the important support and positive collaboration we've enjoyed from the Dean of the College of Law and the Dean of the College of Education and their respective faculties in our work. Using the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals as a foundation for this conference demonstrates your vision and your commitment to ethical research. It also exhibits a commitment to human rights. Why? Because human rights lie at the very core of the 2030 Agenda. 92% of all the sustainable development targets, the 169 targets, are linked to the international human rights instruments as follows: the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, 1948, the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, and the UN Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination against Women. The entire agenda is premised on human rights. It envisages a world in which there is universal respect for rights, dignity, justice, the rule of law, equality, diversity, and inclusion. That essentially is the work of all human rights commissions. In order to fulfill this vision, to realize the agenda in a way that truly leaves no one behind, human rights are paramount. They must be promoted and protected for the Sustainable Development Goals to become a reality. At the same time, progress towards these goals contributes to the realization of human rights for everyone. Human rights are development and interdependent. The implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals is not done in accordance with and in support of human rights. Progress will fail. Human rights must be upheld as we strive to achieve these goals. The goals seek to address some of humanity's biggest challenges, not in some far-off future, but within a few short years. As researchers, you know that if the goal is to be achieved in 9 years, as the UN asks, we need to do more than merely lay groundwork at this point. The Sustainable Development Goals have an aspirational aspect to them. They are, however, meant to be a blueprint to address poverty and inequality. We can no longer see them as merely aspirational. We desperately need to achieve outcomes. To solve our greatest problems, great vision is required. A vision that is collaborative, innovative, and informed by human rights. A vision fueled by research that leads to action. Research is instrumental, to effective decision-making and action. It assesses needs, envisions futures, and finds answers. It helps us uncover and understand the complexity of real-world problems, of which there are many. We live in a world where democracies are being threatened by nationalism, populism, and extremism, where racism and sexism have gained ground because they've been accepted, where dictators trample domestic dissent and wantonly spread their influence to new corners of the globe, where freely elected leaders have prioritized their own interests ahead of the interests of their electorate. Around the world, the rule of law is eroding. Fundamental human rights are being narrowed, and the judicial independence and the rule of law is under assault. To compound matters, a pathogen has changed the course of global economies, global mobility, and knowledge transfer in just mere months. The COVID-19 pandemic has amplified and magnified many pre-existing inequities for aging adults, women, racialized and marginalized groups, people with disabilities, including those people who grapple with disabilities of mental health and addictions. This is the reality of our world today. It is a reality that we must face together with courage, resolve, with wisdom, empathy, collaboration, action, and hope. I hold to the hope that we are on the cusp of a better world. I have hope in people around the world, in our country, and in our province. I hold hope for democracy, the rule of law, justice, decency, and the steady march of human rights. And I have hope in everyone that's here today. You are highly motivated researchers, academics, educators, and leaders, eager to advance human knowledge and solve our most pressing problems. Take the race to create a coronavirus vaccine, for example. The first known COVID outbreak was reported in December 2019. Within weeks, research teams around the globe sprung into action. In less than a year, vaccines were developed. And here at the University of Saskatchewan, the Vaccine and Infectious Disease Organization, VIDO, I'm happy to say, developed Canada's first coronavirus vaccine, which was recently approved for human clinical trials. Creating vaccines so quickly is no small feat. It took 4 years to develop a vaccine for mumps, decades to develop vaccines for polio, yellow fever, and influenza. To have created vaccines for rollout to the public in such a short period of time is unprecedented. The worldwide cooperation in the scientific community that supported these discoveries, I believe, is as well unprecedented. And it is this cooperative action that leads me to have hope for a brighter future, a future which the sustainable goals can indeed be met. Research and human rights. Many of you here today are doing important groundbreaking work that advances the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. The work focuses on creating and maintaining health and well-being, securing and making sustainable food, land, and water, promoting and ensuring quality education, gender equality, and equality for all members of the human family, supporting sustainable, equitable, and diverse communities, guiding climate action, and working on sustainable energy. No matter your area of expertise, regardless of what you're working on, I urge you to conduct your research while applying a human rights lens. A human rights lens is imperative given the increasingly international character of research. Research within a global context requires consistency, credibility, accountability, transparency. Because of its universal nature, a human rights-based approach to research facilitates these goals and the Sustainable Development Goals. The need for the recognition and respect for human rights cuts across national and institutional lines. They improve standards, foster inclusion, and stimulate meaningful, consequential discussion. A human rights-based approach harmonizes ideas and makes those ideas understandable to the people living in different locations, different practices, different methods, and different assumptions. To put it plainly, a human rights-based approach to research provides a framework for sustainable human development. By conducting research through a human rights lens, you strengthen the capacity of individual rights holders and those with the duty to uphold those rights. You ensure that research is respectful of the fundamental rights of its participants and the public. You make a valuable contribution to the overall understanding and achievement of human rights. To be clear, yes, everyone attending this conference today is a rights holder. At the same time, researchers and institutions have a duty to uphold human rights. You are duty bearers. You have responsibilities. If you are wondering how to implement a human rights lens to your research, I suggest you reach out to a human rights agency to put into practice collaboration. The Saskatchewan Human Rights Commission, for example, is mandated to support rights-based research. Section 24 of the Human Rights Code states that there's a duty of this commission to conduct and encourage research by persons and associations actively engaged in the field of human rights promotion. With respect to Tri-Council funding, in the past, our commission has supported research grants with SHRC, NSERC, and we welcome an opportunity to support any future research application on health issues to the CIHR that has a human rights lens to it. We are currently working with a research team at the University of Saskatchewan to analyze online xenophobia during the COVID-19 pandemic. In addition, we have partnered with the University of Saskatchewan College of Law and other stakeholders to create a program on sexual harassment in the workplace. It's called Enough Already. Through that project, we commissioned research on two elements, current public awareness and measuring public opinion, through the Canadian Hub for Applied Social Research, which is an organization based at the University of Saskatchewan. So we're here to help. Human rights agencies want to collaborate with you, not just with research, but also with your institution's overarching approach to human rights. As I mentioned a moment ago, many of you here today are leaders of teams, leaders of people. As such, I remind you to embrace human rights in the workplace. Help ensure inclusion and equity for everyone. To do this, develop an anti-discrimination and anti-harassment policy. Implement policies that eliminate barriers and accommodate diversity. Develop policies that support dignity and the equal moral consideration of all people. Review your operations from a human rights perspective. Remove discriminatory practices such as those that might differentiate on groups such as gender identity, family status, age, perceived race, disability, or religion. Provide human rights training. Practice empathy. Be creative when looking for an alternative and for reasonable arrangements to ensure the full and equal participation of colleagues, employees, and students. Create a diverse and inclusive workplace with intention. The more people with different backgrounds and different experiences you have around your table, the better the results will be. As leaders, make a public commitment to uphold and enhance human rights in your institution. Again, if you're wondering how to implement those kinds of measures, human rights agencies are available to help you. We're all in this together. When attempting to solve problems and address issues, collaboration is key. It's key to improving our institutions and our societies. It is also key to protecting and promoting and advancing human rights. Human rights cannot be upheld and improved alone. When I first was appointed as Chief Commissioner of the Saskatchewan Human Rights Commission in 2019, I was told to refresh, revitalize, and reimagine the Commission. At the time, people dismissed the work of the Commission as being cumbersome, time-consuming, and very biased. We needed to change. We did our research, and we created a new vision that reimagined what a Human Rights Commission could be. As objectives, we committed to retaining practices that work, discarding those that didn't, adopting practices to enhance the Commission's mandate, and creating new means by which to protect and promote human rights in the province of Saskatchewan. The fundamental goal was to be a model of best practices in Canada. The Commission determined that collaboration, open communication were prerequisites to positive change. We shifted our focus from being a prosecutorial body to being a problem-solving organization, and that was a fundamental change in our ethos. That isn't to say that the Commission abandoned litigation. The ability to litigate complaints of discrimination remains a cornerstone of carrying out our mandate. However, the phrase litigation when necessary, but not necessarily litigation, captures our approach to our resolution process, which is appropriate case resolution. We strive to find the appropriate answers, and we provide parties that are in dispute with a menu of solution options. The decision to litigate is never taken lightly. The Saskatchewan Human Rights Commission has the best resolution rate in Canada. 80% of all our complaints are settled within 12 months. 92% are settled within 24 months. No Human Rights Commission in Canada even comes close to that achievement. Mediation. When possible, the Commission relies on mediation to achieve resolution. As many of you know, mediation is aligned with restorative justice principles, widely used in Indigenous communities in Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. This approach to justice is based on restoring harmony and providing a way to maintain that harmony. Best case outcomes include community building, mutual understanding. The fundamental goal is to repair a broken relationship or to keep relationships in the community unbroken. There is no predetermined or expected outcome of mediation, save for cooperative and mannerly exchange of information. In mediation, the best outcome is where parties can leave having resolved their dispute and avoided a breakdown in their civil relationship. The process is always collaborative. Systemic advocacy. Collaboration is also fundamental to the Commission's work on systemic initiatives. When groups of people in Saskatchewan face discriminatory treatment, the Commission may be able to address those concerns systemically. Systemic advocacy is a rights-based approach that can be both reactive and proactive. It can address discrimination that is known to affect groups of people based on protected grounds. It enables the Commission to work with stakeholders to build collaborative relationships, create multi-party action, and enable inclusion and broad-based change in our communities. In order to enact broad-based change, we must turn to guiding principles like those found in the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. The Saskatchewan Human Rights Commission and all human rights commissions owe their existence in part to the United Nations. Human rights made a quantum leap forward in the last half of the 20th century. In 1948, the UN adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. That declaration was the world's response to the Holocaust. It created the foundation for a rights revolution, which occurred post the Second World War. This was the first time in history that the individual rights of all human beings were recognized, just 73 short years ago. The United Nations said we are all part of one human family. And those words are in fact reflected in the Saskatchewan Human Rights Codes and other human rights codes by commissions elsewhere. It was a revolution that witnessed human rights move to the forefront of national and international consciousness. Human rights commissions were created, human rights codes were implemented to protect the inherent dignity and the inalienable rights of all citizens. Now, many people understand that they have rights. However, there is little understanding of the responsibility that comes with those rights. Earlier, I talked about rights holders and duty bearers. To be clear, rights and freedoms come with responsibilities. They coexist. To sustain the achievement of human rights and uphold our democratic freedoms, we need a corresponding responsibility revolution in the first half of the 21st century. The rights revolution was created in courtrooms by lawyers. The responsibility revolution will take place in classrooms, fueled by teachers and driven by students. As academics and researchers, you understand the power of education. So I ask everyone here today to be part of the responsibility revolution, to consider rights and citizenship in addition to your discipline or your field of study. Now, traditionally, education has always focused on training for a job, a vocation, through numeracy and literacy. I call that the old 3 R's: reading, writing, arithmetic. We need to add to that foundation. We need to add a social component, a citizenship education component. Citizenship education recognizes that education has a significant role to play in building the whole citizen, the whole student, through the new 3 R's: rights, responsibility, and respect. Citizenship education requires and answers these questions. What does it mean to be a citizen? What are the rights of citizenship? But equally important, what are the responsibilities that accompany those rights? How do we build and maintain respect for every citizen? Why? Because every human being is someone's child. Every child, every human being deserves equal moral consideration. Every person in every classroom, in every lab, in every research group, every academic institution deserves that same consideration. Right now, at this moment in history, what do we desperately need in society? We need harmony. How is harmony generated? It's generated through respect. How is respect created? It's generated through understanding. How is understanding created? It comes from knowledge. How is knowledge created? It comes from education. Education is the foundation for the harmony and respect we so desperately need in this society and our global community. We need to create access to quality education. We need to strengthen the education foundation. We cannot be passive about creating and sustaining good citizenship in society. We need to intentionally and explicitly teach the responsibilities of citizenship every day in some way in every institution. I'm pleased to tell you that this type of citizenship education is not a Beyond the Horizon initiative. It is happening right now in classrooms throughout this province. Many Saskatchewan students, many future researchers and academics are learning about the responsibilities of citizenship. These responsibilities include, number one, to know and understand your rights of citizenship so you don't knowingly transgress on the rights of others. Secondly, to reconcile with Indigenous people, to make the world a better place, to respect our fellow citizens. No bullying, no racism, no discrimination, no exceptions. Can you imagine the quality and caliber of the citizen produced by this pedagogy? I can. It will be a new generation of citizens eager to learn about social issues and tackle important problems. Brave enough to declare their moral imperatives. Courageous enough to have conversations that matter. Citizens equipped to go out into the world to make a difference. These citizens may one day be your students, your colleagues, your co-workers. Universities represent a coming together of people, diversity, and inclusion. They are cosmopolitan in nature. As academics, researchers, and administrators and leaders, you embrace this nature, and you need to continually adapt. There is a new generation of citizens on its way. Citizens who embody 5 essential competencies of Canadian citizenship, and they are citizens that are engaged, empowered, and enlightened, ethical, and empathetic, the 5 E's of education. As academics and researchers, it's imperative that you understand their expectations, and the benefit of their views and their ideals. So again, I ask everyone here today to be part of the responsibility revolution. Help us build a better future. At the beginning of my talk, I painted an admittedly dark picture of the world. Yet in that darkness lies light. That light exists in the generosity that people around the world have shown to their neighbors during the pandemic. People who understand that providing basic needs like food, water, and shelter is both urgent and necessary. It exists around the world in the actions of those who continue to demonstrate, often at great peril, their desire for democracy and the pursuit of justice. It exists in the urgency, the increased collaboration, and the heightened awareness that has arisen from the COVID-19 pandemic. COVID-19 has presented us with historical challenges, but as well, historical opportunities. Opportunities to address long-standing human rights issues. Solid research based on accurate data is required to provide policymakers with the tools for action. The Sustainable Development Goals require policymakers and politicians to improve social and economic outcomes in our post-pandemic world. It's a two-way street. Governments need to allow, permit, and capture disaggregated demographic data so researchers can produce effective results. The Sustainable Development Goals are attainable. They are a blueprint. We need to accelerate their achievement. The pandemic has demonstrated the need to work harder through coordinated, collaborative, cooperative study and action. As individuals, as citizens, as members of the one human family, the pandemic has proven and provided to us an opportunity to look at ourselves in the mirror and to recognize and accept the unvarnished truths that lie in the world in which we live, to figure out where we went wrong and find solutions to our most pressing problems. We must work together to heal our planet, end poverty, revitalize democracy, reduce inequities, improve education, advance human rights, and make the world a better place. Colloquially, we hear cries to return to normal. Normal is a very much misplaced standard. We need to reach a better place, a place guided by the Sustainable Development Goals, a place where rights are embraced, responsibilities are the norm, and respect is paramount. A place that reflects the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goal targets. We owe it to ourselves, our friends, and our families, and future generations. The opportunity to create transformative, sustainable change is here. The time is now. I said at the beginning, I have hope, hope for a better future. The hope I have is right here with us right now in this virtual room, because ultimately my hope is in your heart and in your hands. Good luck with your research. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your insightful and inspirational keynote, Judge Arnot, and for sharing your pearls of wisdom with us. We will now move into the question and answer period of your keynote. During this time, the chat will be turned on. Audience members, please feel free to type your questions in the chat box and select everyone as the recipient in the chat drop-down menu. Judge Arnot, while we wait for questions to come in, I would like to ask, how can we advance the SDGs, create spaces for informed dialogue, and engaged institutions who have the intent of creating learning and impact in the post-pandemic recovery phase?
Well, I think universities as institutions, researchers as a key component in those institutions, and the work that you're doing have a unique opportunity to lead some of that discussion and to engage policymakers and politicians in this work. I believe there's a strong movement in a broad spectrum of the community, recognizing the problems we have and are looking to solutions. This is such a critical time for researchers to do this work, to lay the foundations for the discussion that needs to take place in the community and with the community, between stakeholders and policymakers and politicians. So in my opinion, this work you're doing here is a good example of what can be done on a larger scale. And this actually does need to be scaled up. We need to give the community the information that you have developed in your research and show the way forward with the guidelines of the Sustainable Development Goals in place. This offers a huge opportunity to address issues in meaningful discussions. And I see the university as an institution and researchers within those universities to help guide, to help shape the discussions that we need to have. I believe there's a thirst currently in communities to do this very thing. You see it all the time. We need to address these issues. They've been highlighted so much during the course of the last 4 years or more, where these problems have been exacerbated and are clearly in front of us. And we all have a vested interest in seeing solutions. And solutions start with good research, really solid, accurate data, pointing in a direction that the community can understand and get behind, and moving together with these policymakers. I believe that the universities, researchers are huge influencers in the development of policy. You know, your role, you have a responsibility, as I said, it's a critical responsibility in this time frame. And I know that you're anxious to leap on those opportunities. You're going to create good data, and I believe good research will support good policy. That's what we need for policymakers and politicians to implement, to in fact get to the end result that we want.
One of the questions that we often get asked is, how can we partner differently and better with actors to improve our effectiveness and understand perceptions of different groups? What do we need to be aware of in terms of protecting people groups and promoting their rights, you know, people, youth abroad, communities abroad, etc.?
Well, in the larger community, I think one of the problems is a fundamental non-understanding of what the issues are, an inability to have an empathy for marginalized groups. And that, I believe education is one of the strongest components for that. And that education can be augmented by the good work that's being done in research at universities, and making sure that that research and those discussion points get to a practical place where they can be discussed in the community. One big avenue, of course, is the K-12 education system, and the leadership that the universities can have, colleges of education, for instance, in shaping the discussions that are occurring in classrooms.
A member of the audience has asked us a question for you, Judge David Arnot. What does it mean to look at issues through a human rights lens? How do people shift their thinking into that kind of mindset?
Well, that's one of my critical messages here today, you know, and I think that I want every researcher to really examine how they're approaching things, both on the practical way that research is done, but also in the areas that are being studied, that are being researched. Look at the topic heads. There's a myriad of them. Discrimination, you know, there's 16 heads of discrimination in our code. They're easy to find, but there's an intersection between many of those heads. You know, if you look at women, children, health, poverty, education, employment, lack of employment, systemic discrimination in many of our institutions, in the healthcare sector, in the justice system. You know, this intersectionality is really important to understand because it really identifies marginalized groups and subgroups in that marginalized experience. And so I invite researchers to really focus on the basic human rights that we all have, the problems that we have, but use that human rights lens to shape your research and look at the intersections where that research can really assist. And I've mentioned some of them, and I know you can easily find them. So my point is really this: if you see those intersections, there's such an alignment with the Sustainable Development Goals. I mean, 169 targets inside those goals, but 92% are all human rights based. So I'm asking you to think about the research you're doing, but shape it in a human rights narrative and see it through a human rights lens. I think it will give you a fresh look at how you can be and your research can be helpful in the community and helpful to this shift that we need to make in a post-COVID world. I mean, the time is really upon us. There's this opportunity that exists like no other in the recent time to actually do that. So I really invite you to understand human rights, look at the headings of human rights, and look at the intersectionality of human rights and see how that fits in your research, whether it's in the healthcare or health issues, or whether it's in justice issues, social issues. But it applies in water, it applies in land, and it applies in, you know, the climate.
Another question that has just come is discrimination seems a serious issue and a killer of innovation in research regarding research funding, especially among students from minority groups. What advice do you have for research funding institutions within universities?
Well, that's a great question. I think research funders, the researchers themselves need to intentionally look at the mechanisms they're using to engage colleagues, to engage and be in a collaborative with perhaps other institutions, but to engage the community, engage students, and to ensure that you have a diverse group of people engaged in your research project. The greater diversity, the larger the scope, and the better the results will be. That's my opinion. So be intentional. Be very intentional about looking at your institution's policies and practices, and make sure that diversity is represented at any table at which you sit, because allowing that in will only generate more perspective on the issue. And that, I think, is critical. So I really like that question because it hones in on one of the points I'm trying to make with you here today. I think that the human rights lens is a foundational approach that you can take to create a better world if you use that lens in your research and framing your research. But the institution probably needs, it's always good to rethink and to look and to see what the policies are, the practices are. And you can look around the table and see about the diversity that, you know, in your own table, your own research group. Are we diverse? Do we have the perspectives of so many people that have been marginalized? It's a time to give voice to voices that have been excluded in the past. And you do that by engaging students. Now, I know the universities by definition are, you know, cosmopolitan, and you know, you represent the best in many ways in some of the work that needs to be done, and you have great examples, but there's always room for improvement. I also want to say, Meghna, I don't have the answers to all these questions, so I might have some questions for you.
Absolutely. We've got one final question that links everything together. How can we make local, provincial, and federal governments accountable to the SDGs locally and globally?
That is a great question. And I believe there's a lot of power and a lot of respect that universities as institutions have. You are huge influencers in any community in which you exist. And I look at the University of Saskatchewan in particular. I call it the relationship between town and gown. You have power, you have influence, and you have mechanisms with good communication to actually get a focus on these policymakers and politicians to fundamentally understand the Sustainable Development Goals, which I'm not sure they do collectively at the moment. And we need to use that as a focus. We can do that in concert with human rights commissions, but many, many agencies exist in any province or any community. You know, civil society is a huge group, but look at the civil society. I say to you, please use your power in a constructive way. Realize how much influence you really do have. It is considerable. Consider the power of a common voice that with agencies, with other stakeholders in the community, in the province, in the country, to shape the discussion that needs to occur and focus, I think, on the province and the community in holding politicians and policymakers to account. These goals of sustainable development have an aspirational component, but it's really a blueprint. And we need to have politicians account to that blueprint. And I think the power of your voices collectively as an important institution, one of the most, I say, influential institutions in this province and any province are the universities, because of all the work that you do and the respect. Really, it's fundamentally about respect that citizens have for the good work that's being done at universities. You've helped shape this province so far, and you, in the Saskatchewan experience, and you have a big role to play in shaping its future. Wouldn't it be wonderful, for instance, if the province of Saskatchewan was held out as a model of best practice on any one of these sustainable goals? I think it would be huge. So Meghna, I really thank you for allowing me to speak to you today and to answer these questions. I can tell by the questions that there's much engagement, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today and to be part of what I think is a very important conference with very important constituents, you know, researchers from around the world. Thank you very much for your good work.
Thank you again, Judge Arnot. I think what you described is an excellent discussion, and there's been a flurry of comments talking about how inspirational your speech has been and the fine examples that you've given us, case studies, and I think there will be follow-up discussions. So thanks to you.